Hello and welcome to Social Samosa. Arun, it's a pleasure to have you again with us in person. We've done a bunch of these sessions on Zoom. I think this is the first time that we are doing this in person. So, welcome to Social Samosa and thank you for doing this with us.
No, thank you for having me here. Real pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So, Arun, I had a great time attending the CPG summit from Meta, and I had a bunch of questions that I would want to ask you in the audience, but I think I needed this room to have this conversation with you. To start with, Arun, I want to understand what is the current state of digital advertising and marketing from a Meta POV. And when I say digital advertising and marketing, I'm talking about a bunch of things brands are doing on digital, the kind of agencies which are popping up, or the creator ecosystem that is there.
Yeah, I think all of these are thriving, for
Yeah.
a variety of reasons. So I think digitization in the country has obviously, skyrocketed, I would say, with not just in the advertising field. If you look at the number of UPI transactions, etc., it's significantly gone up. The number of people, I guess, especially thanks to the pandemic, starting to buy things online or even browse things online has significantly shot up. And especially over the last 3 years, short form video, for example, has significantly taken off. We launched Reels, in July 2020, and it's started monetizing it on in 2021. And you again see now today, it's the fastest, growing surface across the world for Meta. And in terms of both time and engagement, for example, more than 50% of our time spent on Instagram is Reels globally. So I think clearly these trends tell you that consumers are gravitating towards digital mediums. Another I'm seeing stat again from the larger industry landscape is I'm sure there are more people watching IPL, for example, on digital
Right.
OTTs
Yeah.
than really on, let's say, regular television channels, which was the behavior hitherto. So I think clearly you see this all around us, and therefore obviously if consumers are gravitating, advertising benefits from this landscape shift, if I can use that word. So that's clearly one thing which is happening, and clearly with more and more users, obviously, leveraging these platforms, creators as an economy has again grown. Because of the surface, like Reels, for example, was the first time I think where they were able to really express themselves. They were expressing themselves on Instagram, but Reels gave them an opportunity to do it in their own native way with video on as well.
Yeah.
And clearly that again, as the surface has continued to grow, continues to power creators. So I would say all in all, I think we clearly see the tectonic shifts towards digital, and this has also helped digital, which used to be, let's say, 35% of overall ad industry pre-pandemic, to now where it's well over 60%.
Got it. And from your perspective again, so I've had these conversations with a bunch of marketers in the past, and like the common thought earlier was that digital is a stepchild in a brand's marketing mix. Do you see that thing that thought process still flowing through in like advertising and marketing boardrooms, or you see that shift happening even from a spends perspective, even from a adoption perspective? So I do understand that consumers are shifting towards digital. A majority of them have actually had more affinity towards digital, but from a brand's perspective, from a brand's lens, do you see that shift happening?
So I'd say two things, right? So one is, like if you look by, equally how the advertising landscape has evolved, and maybe if we step back in time, so in some sense, like let's say even pre what we know as TV today, which is obviously the main, like typically brands create something for their main medium and then use adapts to really adapt to other mediums.
Yeah.
Historically, that's been TV really over the last 2-3 decades. But there were times, if you go back in time, I'm saying when TV penetration in this country was low, for example, it used to be print or radio or even wall paintings in rural, etc. And that's how really businesses built brands, right, in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So I think clearly now, where things are, I'm saying there is a shift to digital.
Yeah.
Today, I think there are many brands which are, of course, digitally native, digitally born, be it the D2C landscape, be it the marketplace landscape, for example, on Swiggy, on Zomato on one side, or Amazon, Flipkart on the other side.
Yeah.
Obviously, they all think digital, they think performance marketing, etc. Historically, I'm saying, brands, especially from the traditional sectors like CPG, auto, banking, etc., have always relied on, obviously the mainstay medium, which is TV. But I think there is clear recognition, I would say, that digital is, in some sense, in many parts, is larger than TV, and obviously offers benefits that TV doesn't, you know, in some sense. And I think people are starting to create for this medium. Having said that, I guess it's going to be, you know, how do they manage both these mediums? Because, you know, the language is very different, is I guess a key capability that they will have to develop.
Right. And like, you think that, like, my question again goes to, do you think the advertisers and marketers on the other side get this thing that like there has to be probably a good mix of TV and digital, or there can be a time when digital surpasses TV for them, or any other traditional medium for them? Do you think that kind of insight is there on the brand side as well?
No, I think there is recognition. I think, you know, as I said, however, different brands and different companies, or even different brands within the same company, are at different, you know, stages of evolution. You know, so basis their audience, for example, let's say if I take a brand like, you know, Lakme within the Unilever stable, I'm saying obviously they're talking more to the, you know, teenager or the young adult, you know, who's possibly in college or entering her first job. So clearly it's more, you know, has to be, it's a necessity to really talk to the digital first audience, right? Whereas if you talk of some of the really iconic large brands from the same company, they still have to balance both, you know, in terms of saying what's the right medium and what's the right creative. I think they're all in different stages of that journey. Having said that, digital is at a point today where its reach as well, you know, so like if I go back again, I'm just saying 3-4 years ago, the reach has significantly multiplied of, you know, each of these platforms. And I think there's recognition, there is reach, there is, how do I put it? People are still figuring the how, if I can say that. Yeah.
Got it. And like, coming to the topic of discussion today about how CPG brands have been leveraging digital, what are some of the macro trends that you've seen in the way FMCG advertising and marketing is shaping, or macro trends which are shaping advertising and marketing in the current times?
See, I think, you know, we had, you know, I think seen the reports, as you also must have seen from Kantar and Nielsen as well, which tells you that the ROI spent, for example, on digital today outstrips that of TV, and within digital, actually ROI on Meta outstrips that of anyone else at this point of time. The simple reason is all the other factors that I spoke about, which is basically your reach is increasing, which is your denominator.
Absolutely.
So clearly, if you are able to, you know, generate either more, you know, salience or meaningfulness or differentiation, which all contribute to brand imagery, you know, you obviously get more bang for the buck, simply put, from the same dollar. So clearly, we are seeing, you know, this impact that ROI is higher for CPG brands for two reasons. One is, as I said, the denominator is changing. Two is consumers are engaging with these brands as well as in digital. So like for the, you know, early birds who have started investing, or even for most brands today have actually tried to slap on their own creatives on, let's say, surfaces like Reels. Of course, they're getting good returns, you know, because just being salient will give you certain returns. But I think the next step in the evolution is to really start saying, I'll start making bespoke creatives for the medium. For the medium. Because what we are seeing is, for example, when that is done, that's when true magic happens and your ROIs are even higher, right? In terms of actually where consumers then pause, you know, stay with the content, engage with that, where they get the full message. Today, you're largely achieving your objectives by just, you know, getting that brand out there. But tomorrow, people will understand what does the brand mean for me, and whether, you know, your consideration, other scores will go up. So I think that's when true magic happens, and I think that's where they are in their journey.
Right. And like in those findings of the report, like, have we seen any sub brands within CPG that are growing quite massively, and the growth is quite high there, or like, do you even spot any sub brands which, or subcategories which are yet to, you know, see the fruits of the medium?
See, I would phrase it differently, right? See, if you look at the report, what it tells you is that, firstly, you know, and as you know, the CPG industry has not really grown at a very large pace over, let's say, last couple of years, for example, and we're seeing that all in the news, right? Category penetrations have remained constant to growing, meaning, you know, for example, the number of people buying shampoo or toothpaste or tea, etc., largely remain constant. But the study actually tells you that for the large iconic brands in these categories, the penetrations have actually shrunk. And when they deep dive into why the penetrations have shrunk over 3 years, as you know, as per the Kantar methodology, there are 3 attributes, which is salience, meaningfulness, and differentiation. Both salience and meaningfulness have dramatically shrunk. Compared to differentiation. And one of the reasons they attribute this to, is just one, because there could be many other variables like pricing, etc., is that the mediums of consumption have changed. So, for example, they've also correlated this to an analysis that they have done, on what is the viewing behavior across mediums. For example, if they take a 3-year snapshot, whether it's Gen Z, Gen Alpha on one side, whether it's small town, large town, tier 2, tier 3, rural, percentages of audiences viewing TV has shrunk,
Right.
across these, and equally percentage of audiences viewing digital has increased if you take the index as 100. So
Right.
I think basically as long as you are fishing where the fish are in some sense and making sure your money's moved to the right medium, you're obviously able to get ROI. So I
Right.
think that's really what's happening. And therefore, and what's the other insight from the report also is that basically, while category penetrations are constant and obviously if the iconic brands have lost, who has gained? It seems to be more nimble-footed, smaller D2C brands. So basically,
Right.
like you have new age challengers possibly challenging these brands, with new ways of potentially reaching audiences or marketing, which is who they're losing to. And this is what I guess is out there for the large brands to really figure out and fix their strategies.
Right. So you're saying that there is a gap in the way they look at digital as a medium, and that gap is being filled by nimble, new age D2C brands. So do you have any examples of D2C brands who've grown quite extensively over the last 2-3 years with digital, or those are like digital first D2C brands that way?
You have many, right? I mean, like for example, if I take the entire Mamaearth portfolio, they're a listed company now. I'm saying obviously have scaled in a rapid period. Leveraging platforms like Facebook and Instagram. And really built their identity in a very digital first way. So clearly, obviously, in the categories that they operate, whether it's facial cleansing, whether it is shampoo, etc. They have managed to chip away obviously shares from some of the larger brands.
And like in this whole scheme of things, how's Meta enabling CPG brands? Like what are the kind of possibilities brands can explore with Meta?
See, I think one is, as I said, I think two ways, right? One is to constantly look at how, I would say, consumer patterns are changing. So one is we are trying to obviously bring the industry together and really sharing our insights with what's happening, again, through independent agencies like Nielsen and Kantar in terms of, again, viewability patterns, etc., in terms of what they're seeing. Two is, working alongside some of these advertisers to really understand their offerings, objectives, and how can it be, let's say, story told in a digital first manner is really what I would say is something that we are trying to work with those teams on.
And like in terms of the Meta ecosystem, what are some of those inventories or media opportunities that brands are like finding success with, or probably the ones even which are underrated according to you?
Sorry, what do you mean by the second point on underrated?
Basically, like there could be some inventories which are like working wonderful for brands and brands are already invested in it, but there could be some inventories which are very underrated or like not really leveraged to the best of their potential.
See, again, I don't think it is. It's different brands, as I said, right? It's not a one shoe fits all. There are some brands which are closer in terms of their audiences to new age brands. Like a Lakme, L'Oreal, etc., or even let's say Cadbury Silk and stuff like that, right? So clearly, these brands, we find that either the language they use, in terms of how they used to story tell on digital, as well as the work that sometimes they do with creators, etc., obviously are little ahead and may rightfully be so as well, compared to some of the other brands which are more mass and let's say focused on really a wider audience in tier 2, tier 3, etc. So these are some of the examples. So like I'll give an example. So like if I take creators as such, right? So whether it's L'Oreal, who worked with creators and tried to get the creator to also talk about the efficacy of the shampoo, etc. They saw improvement both in awareness as well as consideration, right? So it was also measured. Similarly, I'm saying Mondelez has used this in multiple campaigns, right? In terms of trying to again talk about their portfolio on chocolates, etc. Nestle has used this on Maggi, for example, right? And even like for example during let's say the last World Cup, etc. Nestle used this pretty effectively across their chocolates portfolio as well as Maggi in really trying to get their stories through reels at that point of time. So I think these are some of the examples where I think some brands have moved, I would say, ahead. I guess these are examples which other brands obviously will learn from.
Got it. And speaking of the ROI pit that you mentioned about in the Kanta report as well, that the money spent on digital has much higher ROI as compared to other mediums. So what are some of the things brands should keep in mind to drive more digital ROI? Or from your perspective, what are those best practices that the brands which are doing well on are following?
See, one is I think constantly reevaluate, at the end of typically the methodologies, let's say every quarter, etc. And what's your input in terms of, let's say, how have you spent your money,
Yeah.
and what's your output in terms of where is the source of awareness or where is the source of those metrics, and I guess rebalance the portfolio, right?
Yeah.
The challenge is many brands today also we see almost allocate X% first to medium one and almost then give the leftovers to medium two. That will not work, especially in a, I would say, phase where the industry itself is struggling to grow very strongly. So it's obviously you will get more growth if you spend that same dollar somewhere else,
Right.
Versus the conventional medium. So that's definitely one of the first practices. The second one is obviously start experimenting even within that, because just for example, you can't continue to just slap on the same ad that you have on let's say television and put it on digital and expect people to view the same thing and be engaged. It may happen one time, but it's not going to happen again and again. In a medium where you can clearly scroll down to the next reel.
Right. And I think a bunch of presentations today even spoke about how brands could be using creators as like personalities, not just to drive organic, but even to use creator-based ads.
Yeah.
So you see that also as a thing that is picking on for brands?
Definitely. See, I would say that still I think specifically to this industry, I would say, I don't know, I mean, it's difficult to put a percentage or a number, but let's say there is still a bulk of the work is still your core message, your salience, your proposition and benefit, which can be told in evocative ways. I'm not saying Reels is the only medium. For example, WhatsApp is the other medium. We'll come to that as well.
Yeah.
But, how do you really do that is still the core. But the cherry on top can be an influencer, because what we are seeing is increasingly there's a big role that creators and influencers are playing in authentically narrating, benefits and stories of brands in their own way. So, for example, last year we had done we got brands and creators to handshake on a variety of brands.
Right.
And we saw, for example, even in a brand like Maruti, when they launched this car called Fronx, they tied up with a creator who composed some music as the sound of Fronx, and it had very high, objectives being attained in terms of, let's say test drives and registrations, etc., and inquiries well before the launch.
Right.
So I think you're seeing even, I would say, traditional brands obviously try and experiment. We saw this across many other, whether it's digital first like Amazon Prime and Meesho on one side, or Tanishq, etc. Tanishq is another interesting example, right? So like, while it's still a iconic traditional brand, it may not be CPG here, but initially they started by really like, I would say, just slapping their television assets onto Reels.
Yeah.
They did get some traction, but as I said, slowly they've evolved now where they're almost making bespoke, short creatives for Reels, and that's the journey that I think they have been on, and clearly are seeing enough, ROI metrics supporting this.
Yeah. And in your success stories that you've shared so far, which is the one that stands out for you, and which is the one that actually amazed you that, okay, this is a possibility that could like happen with Meta as a medium?
See, I think, so for example, I think the first time we did some, work with the Kantar thing is what I was quite surprised by, which is I knew that, we are a large reach medium. And what I was surprised by was how we were impacting imagery scores.
Yeah.
Right, in terms of the source of imagery, which tells you that even if people are in theory just browsing the content, even 3 seconds or 5 seconds of something they see can actually help in creating memory structures around the brand, which obviously leads to positive connotations around the imagery. So that was the biggest surprise for me.
Okay. And one last thing, what's the one thing that you would want to give away or like a takeaway for brands watching this? Like, what's that one thing that they should be changing, and what's that one thing they should be sticking to all this while?
No, I would say definitely, in today's era, I mean, the times we live in, I think clearly making creatives for the medium is what I would really advise brands and marketers to do. So whether it's on Reels on one side, or second is even on conversations on WhatsApp, for example, how do you really like get the right flow to have a conversation? Because obviously it's a great dream, and a possibility where you can talk one-on-one to each of your consumers. But how do you really get that to be, conversation that the consumer looks forward to, right? So I would say both creating the medium and then creating for the medium and Reels, conversing with the right intent in WhatsApp. In some sense, speaking the language of both of these mediums is what I would leave brands and marketers with.
All right. Thanks, Arun. Thanks a lot for doing this with us. I think our audience got a lot of takeaways from this. I hope you had a good time chatting with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks always.
All right.